Who are the Goths is known to any person who was at least a little interested in the period of the fall of the Western Roman Empire and some time after. These guys naked Valentus at Adrianople, together with the Romans naked the Huns on the Catalaunian Fields, and also ruled Rome and kept half of Europe in fear, albeit for a limited time. But who are the Goths? Here's where it gets interesting. Again, any person who has ever studied German will look at words like Apollos, Swistar, or Gagan, and albeit with difficulty, recognize in them the good old Upper German apple, sister, and go. And in principle it is clear that the tribe has Germanic roots, and even the region is more or less established, except that Scandinavia is somehow too broad a concept. The historian Jordan says that the ancestral home of the Goths is somewhere in the area called Skansa, which lies opposite the river Vistula, which flows out of the Sarmatian Mountains and separates Scythia from Germany. By Vistula, apparently, is meant the Vistula River, and then the mythological Skansa is an island called Gotland. Here even an Englishman would be able to pick out the land of the Goths. But I will remind you that the linguist Germanist Guman gives the word Skansa as Skandia, which is very similar to the word Scandinavia, and even more so to the name of one of the districts of Sweden, Skåne. True, it reads like Skan, but it looks impressive. As if that wasn't enough, the Skåne Peninsula is part of the historical province of Gotaland, and within the historical documents of those years, the ethnonyms Goth, Got, and Gaut are basically identical. With the names of the tribes, too, not everything is clear. We know that there are Ostgoths and Visigoths, that is, Goths east and west. However, in Jordan's Getica, these tribes appear under the name Greitungi, literally, from stony lands, as Nibelungs, and Tervingi, literally, forest, as Carolingians, respectively. And this despite the fact that he, describing Skansa, mentions such tribes as Vagoths, Ostrogoths, and on top of that, Gautogoths. He also claims that Osgoths and Visigoths are terms he invented to conventionally divide all Gothic tribes into those that went east and those that went west. Again, going back to the province of Gotaland, there were quite large settlements of Västergotland and Östergötland. In short, no one knows why some are called Visigoths and others Ostgoths, and whether it coincided so well that some went west and others east. And indeed, from which Proto-German dialect the word Goths itself came. I had two sources, Guman's textbook and Jordan. I have already mentioned what Jordan says about it, but Gukman thinks that Ostrogoths means Eastern Goths. But Visigoths are often mentioned as Visigoths, and this route is definitely not Germanic West. Jordan has little faith in this regard, although he lived with the Goths and was himself either a Goth or their relative Alan. His work, Getica, presumably, brazenly stole from the History of the Goths by Cassiodorus and a couple of other sources. Not only that he confused Goths and Goths, at that time the former had already chased the latter out of their seats in Thrace, but also referred to some ancient songs, claiming at the same time that he did not believe in ancient tales. But let's return to our sheep. The Goths at some point decided that their homeland, wherever it was not enough for them, and decided to move to the mainland, which, according to legend, and realized under the leadership of the mythical king Berig on 3 ships, and on the 3rd ship sailed a tribe of Gepids, related to the Goths, which was confirmed even Procopius, Belisarius's secretary, who defeated the Goths easily. But not the point. All 3 tribes, after their landing in Normandy, Danzig, Gdansk, developed active activity and walked along the Vistula riverbed, freeing the living space by fire and sword, having driven away the Rugians, Burgundians, and another of their kin, the Vandals. And after 5 generations, the Goths made another move, and moved to where it was warmer, to Transnistria. The only problem was that the local inhabitants, the Goths, were not at all happy about such neighbors. The Goths, of course, did not care, and the Goths were all killed. Having settled on the banks of the Danube, they founded the country known as Aujom. It was a good name, considering that 3 sides of the 4 Aujom were surrounded by swamps. The city of Dunparstadir, the capital of the Goths, was founded there. Here again there are Gothic tricks. Some historians associate Dunparstadir with Kiev, but it could be located literally anywhere. Despite the temptation to translate the name as standing on the Dnieper was known among the Goths as Dnieper. Some people generally say that Dunpre was the entire land where the Goths lived. Moreover, a few years later, the Goths became so bold that they attacked Dacia and drove the Romans out of there. About the same time, they established themselves in the Crimea. They lived there in principle not badly, periodically piled on the Romans, periodically from them also raked up, noted in the next Scythian War. They were baptized into the Arian faith, thanks to Bishop Wulfila. And then came the Huns. The Huns were the ultimate barbarians, uncultivated by their long neighborhood with Rome. Wild. The Huns invaded Europe, and for 100 years they raped everyone there, and the Goths were no exception. Realizing it was useless to fight the Huns, the Goths moved away from Oyam. Some went south, having defeated the Roman armies near Adrianople, then having received from the Romans on the head in Pannonia, and finally settled there as federates. Some stayed, accepting Hunnish rule. Well, and someone went west, towards the future Western Roman Empire. That's where the Ost and Visigoths diverged. For the Visigoths, the hour of glory had arrived. The kingdom of Toulouse, the kingdom of Aquitaine, the kingdom of the Visigoths in Spain. They were the first barbarians 800 years after the Gallic Wars to take Rome. Then they allied with Rome to stop Attila on the Catalaunian Fields. They fought off the Franks. Finally, they held back the Arabs to the very end, and literally at the end of their strength, they held them back to start the 700-year Reconquista. There was no strength left to remain distinctive, and the Visigoths dissolved among the Iberians, Moors, Franks, and other inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula. Culturally, the Visigoths had little to offer. Not only did they eventually become Catholics, but their language was very much influenced by Iberian colloquialisms, not to mention Latin. In fact, even in areas where the Visigoths did not succumb to the influence of the Arabs, the language spoken is not Germanic, but Romance. Latin won out over Gothic. The adventures of the Osgoths were no less exciting. First, in the battle on the Nadao River, they threw off Hunnish rule after their kinsmen had defeated Attila in the Catalonian Fields. Left to live in Illyria as federates, at some point they could not stand it, and arbitrarily seceded from the Eastern Roman Empire, founding the kingdom of the Osgoths. But they really blossomed when King Theodoric came to power. He was raised in Byzantium, where he was a hostage, and coming to power first attacked Odoacer, king of Italy, who overthrew the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Having successfully seized the Italian lands, Theodoric began to rule them surprisingly wisely and fairly for a barbarian Germanic. That period is called the Ostgothic Revival for a reason. Nicknamed the Great, Theodoric wanted not just to repeat the structure of the empire as the Vandals did in Africa, but to create something original to combine the Goths and Italians in one nation, and he almost succeeded. Despite the fact that there was an Ostgothic kingdom for only 58 years, most of the inscriptions in Gothic come from there. It would seem that Italy is reborn from the horror in which it plunged during the Western Roman Empire, but unfortunately, first died Theodoric the Great, then began internal turmoil among the Gothic nobility, and finished them Belisarius. Shortly before that rolled in a thin, pancake kingdom of Vandals and Alans. Strangely enough, the Gothic heritage lasted longest in the Crimea. For example, after the final destruction of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Principality of Theodoro, located in the Crimea, was called Gothia, and both Gothic and Greek were spoken there. The last mention of the Goths dates back to 1562, when Austrian diplomat Busbeck mentioned in a letter that the locals in the Crimea spoke a strange language, even giving specific examples, in which, although with difficulty, Gothic words and phrases are recognized, although changed under the influence of local languages. Goth culture was mostly Ostgothic, thanks to Theodoric. Here the story is similar to the Slavs. In order to convert them to Christianity, an alphabet was needed. It was the priest Wulfila who invented it for the Gothic Bible, and it is to him that we owe the fact that I am clarifying some points for this article from Mira Guman's textbook. Yes, this is where the roots of the Gothic German script, which in fact is already just a stylization of the Latin script Antiqua, grow from. From their confrontation grew most of the modern printed fonts, and the Bible of Wulfila is still the most extensive source of information on the Gothic language. Although there is a possibility that this translation was not the first, or at least not the only one, and the phrases and how the scribes and commentators of the Bible used them suggest that there was a translation tradition there long ago. All right, what does this have to do with the Goths? And here everything, unlike the history of the Goths themselves, is very simple. The word Gothic in Italian was associated with whom, and since Italians interacted most of all with the Goths, they, not the Franks, who lived to the north and especially with the Romans, did not mix. The Lombards, who came once at the very end and did not arise again, or the Vandals, who generally settled in Africa, although they had their share, suffered all the horrors of barbarian conquests. Thus the word Goth and the word barbarian came to mean approximately the same thing. Gothic as an architectural style was formed at the end of the Middle Ages and completed the development of European medieval art, arising on the basis of the achievements of Romanesque culture. At the same time, in the Renaissance, art of the Middle Ages was considered barbaric, hence the name to the same Goths have a very indirect relationship. However, many people liked the gloomy style of the Gothic, and literature corresponding to the style appeared.